Record unemployment lows among all races and genders means Trump is the most woke activist for social justice in America today. Along with that, celebrating Christian bakers, National Whores Day, the American Socialist Party, and a whole bunch of other things next in the Dr. Duke Show. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Duke, and thank you for joining us once again, America. As always, I'm joined by Katie Petrick of the Healthy Republic for the Countdown, America. Katie, what do you have for us this week in America?
In America, this week we have the U.S. Supreme Court backed a Christian baker who rebuffed a gay couple, as the headlines say. So the Supreme Court ruled that a Colorado baker does not have to bake the cake, bigot. Basically, the background is Jack Phillips is an owner and operator at Masterpiece Cake Shop. And in 2012, a gay couple came into his shop and wanted a wedding cake made. Now, at the time, this is important, in 2012, Colorado did not recognize same-sex marriage. And due to his religious beliefs, Jack Phillips said, I'm sorry, I can't bake you this cake. I can bake you a cake for your birthday, I can bake you brownies and cookies and all that, but because of my religious beliefs, I will not bake you a wedding cake. Well, the couple filed a complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and it became a suit that was won by the plaintiffs, and it ordered Phillips to not only bake the cake, but that he had to change company policy, and he had to provide staff training on discrimination. All right, so now the case goes to the Colorado Court of Appeals, and they upheld the commission's ruling. Now, it's 2018, and the Supreme Court took on this case, and they just this week decided that, hey, in this instance, Jack Phillips, you are in the right.
Well, it's a minor victory. I don't know why, but the Supreme Court decided not to strike down this law, this Civil Rights Commission diktat that basically says that you have to do whatever you're told to do. If somebody demands, and again, I'm still waiting for somebody to test this theory. If there's an Islamic bakery anywhere in Colorado, I would love that gay couple to bravely march in there and demand a cake. I have a lingering suspicion that the discrimination committee would find an entirely different set of arguments. But the thing about this is for Jack Phillips, this gay couple knew exactly what they were doing when they went into his store. Jack Phillips actually is such a devout Orthodox Christian that he refuses to get this, he refuses to bake Halloween cakes for Halloween, because he is so carefully tied to his particular brand of Christianity. He will not honor the holiday of Halloween, which he considers to be a pagan, with some justification, considers to be a pagan holdover. And so this is, can you imagine a coven of Wiccans coming into his establishment and demanding a witch cake, and him saying, no, this never would have been a big deal. But this couple, this gay couple, actually sought this guy out for this very reason, to prompt this kind of legislation, this kind of a blowback against Mr. Phillips. Well, it's great that the Supreme Court has vindicated him. It's also great that the Supreme Court made it absolutely clear that they were disgusted by Colorado's abject and disdainful treatment of Mr. Phillips's religion. They did not like the fact that they made this an attack on his Christianity. But again, it doesn't stop the fact that there's no reason another gay couple can't walk into Jack Phillips' store tomorrow, find the exact same situation, and go right back through the system and process it again.
Yeah, I think it's very important to note that, because, and this will happen, it was a 7-2 victory. And that looks on surface like, wow, this is a big win for religious freedom, but it's not. This was a very narrow victory in the sense that the scope of it was not even for his religious freedom, it was more for his civil rights. The Supreme Court basically kind of slapped the Court of Appeals and the Commission, saying what you're doing is targeting this specific man for his Christianity. It's not even about religious freedom in the broad sense, as the Constitution dictates in the First Amendment. The only person who actually argued for the First Amendment in the opinion, other than the two dissenters, was Clarence Thomas. And so obviously if Thomas says it, then we can take that. But the other ones weren't even fighting for it on the First Amendment.
Well, again, like I said, the big problem with it is that it doesn't address the cause of this discrimination. The Supreme Court seems to acknowledge that this Christian baker was discriminated against, rather than being a discriminator, which they didn't comment on, right? They refused to comment on whether or not the Christian baker was discriminatory. But they made it absolutely clear that Colorado was discriminating against the baker. That's the takeaway. It's a small victory, as you said. It doesn't, it provides no redress for for Christian bakers in places like Oregon who've lost their business because of this exact same kind of an idea. So it doesn't redress any of the major underlying issues. But moving forward, when we think about how precedental these decisions from the Supreme Court are. Certainly what they did yesterday is going to be taken into account should these issues and they will make their way to the Supreme Court again. We've got to get to the point where we address the underlying issue. The First Amendment protects religious freedoms. It doesn't impinge upon them. It protects the right to people to bring religion into even their workplaces without fear of retribution. And if that's the case, then we've got to get that cleared up at the highest court.
Yeah, and I just want to make a note here with Justice Kennedy, because he wrote the majority opinion. And this really tells you that this was not the victory that all Christians in the U.S. wanted. He says in there that there is an authority of a state and its governmental entities to protect the rights and dignity of gay persons who are or wish to be married. Who defines what dignity means, and what does that definition even look like? Because basically what we've seen in other cases, other Supreme Court cases, I mean, Obergefell in 2015, that's exactly what opened this all up. This specific case was for Jack Phillips. He got the win, but not America in
Well,
general.
it's interesting that Justice Kennedy, who's been one of those wishy-washy on the fence, more liberal than conservative justices, it's interesting that he finds a mandate in the states to protect certain kinds of individuals within the state. Alarming, right, that doesn't extend to the preborn. That's the problem with Anthony Kennedy and much of the rest of the Supreme Court down through the years, that they'll find these made-up protections for all sorts of classes, but the absolutely most vulnerable are not protected.
All right, rolling right along here, kind of along the same strain of thought. It's Pride Month, and we have a story that is discussing a 11-year-old boy. I guess his name is CJ Duran. At least he identifies with male pronouns. Orange County announced that he is going to be the youngest LGBT Pride Parade Grand Marshal in history. And I guess when he was 10 years old, a year ago, he attended this parade last year with his parents, and he found, I guess, influential and uplifting. And so now they've made him the Grand Marshal for the upcoming parade. His mom, Lori, says, it's sending a message to those haters who come out so strongly after last year's parade that it doesn't matter. And I guess he's grasping this activism route, and he's dedicated a lot of this past year to doing activist things.
We'll get used to it. With the rise of the David Hogg phenomenon, you're going to see younger and younger activists here. And what this all means is that these are activists that are actually being managed by their parents, generally speaking. So you've got an 11-year-old boy who identifies as a girl, or kind of identifies as a girl, who is now in charge. If a little boy could pretend to be a little girl, then without any consequence, then certainly there is no reason why a little boy can't pretend to be a grand marshal of a pride parade. It's interesting, though, that you're going to have an 11-year-old overseeing a parade where you've got oily men in ashless chaps grinding up against fire hydrants. This is appropriate now for little kids. And you can begin to see what's happening here. Not only are things like the Gay Pride Parade exploding and expanding the definition of what's socially acceptable in our culture, it's also doing more than that. It is dragging younger and younger ages of kids into this as well, right? In order to promote certain kinds of lifestyles, we're opening this up now to little children. We're making them part of this as well. I remember from the parade a few years ago, there were all these little kids.
Did you attend?
I was on video. I didn't attend.
Okay.
Right. Never mind. I will say this: if I was to attend, I would wear my Argyle assless chaps. That's all I'm saying.
Hey, keep it classy.
If we were going to, for a couple years ago when they showed news feeds of the Pride Parade, I was stunned at how many 4-, 5-, and 6-year-old kids parents brought to watch the gyrating and the air humping. I guess that's the gay equivalent of air guitar, air humping, that you would see walking down the street and parading men in feathers, lots of nudity, lots of, like in New Orleans, lots of flashing. What again is the most dangerous part of this, and I know we've got an addendum to this story, but we're going to pick this up. How kids now, younger and younger children, are actually being sexualized by their parents in really dramatic ways to make a point the parent wants to make, not necessarily one the kids even understand.
Well, yeah, and on this mother's, I think it's her Instagram account, I found a photo of her, and her tag is called "Raising My Rainbow." And that's her Instagram. That's her, I guess, in the background. She says, "It's going to suck when I'm older and we can't go in the bathroom together to reapply lip gloss," my son said. "I know, it totally will," I said. And then she has all these hashtags about being a mom and growing up gay and genderqueer, parenting, mommy life, mommy and me. Like, this is exactly, this photo, I think, captures everything.
Yeah, it makes the exact point I was just trying to make. If you look at this picture, it is everything that's wrong with this kind of cultural, social approach to sexuality and gender. This is all about mom. Look at mom there, taking a selfie of herself, glamour picture. Her young son, 11 years old this boy is. He has not, or is only beginning the process of puberty, probably hasn't even started it yet. And they've all decided already, for the greater glory of her vanity, right, and all the hashtags she gets to put about what a progressive mom she is, right? The idea that somehow kids that young, who we would not trust to make decisions about guns or to make decisions about voting or make decisions about driving a car, we're going to trust these kids now to drink. We're going to trust these 11-year-olds who, again, haven't hit puberty yet, to determine exclusively on their own what gender or sex or how they relate to these things, and it's not on their own, and it's not their choice. This is the parents manipulating them. And explain to me why it is that when we saw in the news a 14-year-old girl who took a picture with her dad's shotgun, the father got fired as a fireman, right? A 14-year-old girl grabbed one of her dad's guns, took a picture and sent out a tweet about it. For that, the father, the fireman father, got fired that the little girl had the guns. We hold the parents responsible for all the goofy thing young kids do. In this instance, it's exactly the opposite. There is nothing but an endless train of praise for mothers like this who use their kids to satisfy their own vanity. You know what these kids are? These kids are just little dress-up dolls now. These kids are fashion accessories for the moms and dads. They are fashion accessories that you can dress up, and you can put wigs on them, and you can put makeup on them, and then you could do it all, go home and wash it all away and redress them as something else in the next morning. They're little more than just fancy dress-up chihuahuas for these parents. All that vanity, if you throw that picture up again one more time, Mike, look, it's really a disgusting picture when you stop and think about it. The vanity of all of this, the look at me. The little boy is looking in the mirror while he puts on makeup. The woman is looking into her phone while she takes a selfie. That is such a wonderful commentary. And no wonder that you're going to have an 11-year-old boy like that leading a very, very raunchy gay pride parade down the streets of San Francisco.
Yeah, well, in keeping on track here with getting to choose things and be dress-up dolls, New York City is on track to get its third gender option put onto your birth certificate. So there's a proposal out there, and Mayor Bill de Blasio and City Council Speaker Corey Johnson said the new category of X would be available, the letter X. And there's already an option to put sex as undetermined when you have a baby, but the new Gender X proposal is aimed at non-binary adults who wish to change their birth certificates. We have this already happening. California, Oregon, and Washington already have it going on, and now New York City is getting it. You don't have to have had any gender reassignment surgery. You just have to say, I would like to be an X.
But the idea of this is just, again, this is just basically more of the you are what you say you are. And how do you limit this now? I mean, what if you are somehow you don't identify with alphabets, or you think the Western alphabet is somehow oppressive? We know that, right?
26 letters does not equal to our 57, 58,
yeah, we got
72 genders.
How many different kinds of genders and only 26 alphabetical letters? I mean,
it's just oppressive.
And X, of course, has throughout our history been associated with negation, right?
Exactly.
You're Xing things out. You're
maybe
putting a
U.
Yes, maybe a U, right? A U is not bad, or maybe a Q because it's kind of got the little penis
just
thing hanging off of it. I mean, there's a lot of different letters you could have used to do this. Mayor de Blasio, you need to go back to the Soviet Union, you need to go back to your socialist origins and really get your head straight about the proper way to include people. The Soviets just took the attitude, I know you're a big fan of communism, the Soviets just put a bullet in everybody's head without worrying about it. Didn't matter if you were rich or poor, gay, straight, X, Y, Z, it didn't matter what you are. Take the same approach, de Blasio, to assigning genders in the state, in Manhattan. Do that and don't worry about the rest of it. We'll see where we end up.
In the name of equality.
In the name of equality.
Equality.
Right? Yes.
I don't know what you were doing on Saturday, but I was celebrating the International Whores Day. On June 2nd, it was the 43rd annual Whores Day, and it was celebrated across the United States in Oakland, in New York City, in Chicago. And basically, sex workers were holding demonstrations to voice their opposition to the recently passed anti-sex trafficking bill called Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act. It's a really long title. So they were basically demonstrating their opposition to this, and they were advocating for the decriminalization of prostitution. In Oakland, it was estimated about 300 prostitutes and their supporters gathered to celebrate and to promote the rights of sex workers. And some of the signs that they held up said, "Stigma kills, my body, not your choice. You can see my body, my rules, and sex work does not equal trafficking."
Yeah, you know, when they first said that it was International Whores Day, right?
Day.
I thought you were just talking about the United Nations. That's the thing that immediately leaps to mind. It'd probably be more appropriate. But International Sex Workers Day, the thing that is really disturbing about this, and you see this so many times with leftist activism, in order to promote their particular leftist ideological worldview, they are more than willing to trample on the rights of others, right? When we think about the NARAL crowd, we think about the Planned Parenthood crowd who wants abortions through all 9 months, wants it completely legal, wants doctors to be forced to allow babies that are born alive as a result of botched abortions to simply linger in pain and die. So in other words, that the sacrament of abortion is so sacred to quasi-feminist causes that no matter how many other rights and common sense medical appropriations get completely undercut because of it. Same thing you see here with this, that this is an organization that is actually fighting against sex trafficking. They're fighting sex trafficking legislation. They do not want sex trafficking to be gone after. They do not want various laws and rules put in place to curtail or stop the sex slave trade.
And specifically child sex trafficking.
Child sex trafficking.
So they're against...
They're against protecting children. Exactly right. Because their liberal worldview, their liberal... It's the same thing we just saw with the Gay Pride Parade, right? The idea... If this was a heterosexual parade that glorified heterosexual sex, if this was, instead of a gay pride parade, it was a hetero pride parade, and you had 35-year-old housewives in feather outfits flashing things, and the marshal of that was some underage child, I guarantee you leftist activists would be absolutely up in arms about the cisgender patriarchy that was being reinforced here. But because it's a liberal progressive cause, so adamant are they about their rights to be whatever they want to be, in this case prostitutes, legalized prostitutes, that they're more than willing to sell child slavery, child sex trafficking, get rid of all legislation to make that more palatable to them. They'll have greater freedom if you don't try to come after little kids. And it's ironic, isn't it? Because you've got David Hogg and those other group of progressives who are making exactly the opposite argument. In order to protect people from guns, we must take away all kinds of guns, right? We must strip all gun rights. We must get rid of the Second Amendment entirely. We must disband organizations like the NRA. When the left has its cause, they're willing to illegally or throw all sorts of related causes under the bus. When the left's cause is going after a traditional right like the Second Amendment, they want complete removal of all rights and privileges. That, my friends, is how fascists operate.
All right. I don't know if these prostitutes file their taxes, but we did learn that the unemployment rate has fallen to an 18-year low at 3.8%. So they're employed, and it seems like a lot of America is being employed right now. The only time the rate was lower was in December of 1969. And put this in perspective, Donald Trump at that time was 23 years old.
So 1969 is the only time in modern history where the American unemployment rate is lower than it is now. And I think in 1969, probably a good deal of that low unemployment was attributed to the fact that all young men were over in Vietnam. What huge percentage of the workforce, all right, that would have been measurable by unemployment statistics was technically employed fighting a war in Vietnam. So when you think about it, this is a staggering number for Donald Trump. And I'll go one step further about this. What is it that we can say here other than, you don't like Trump's rhetoric, you don't like his language, he's not PC or woke enough for you. And yet, under Donald Trump, and I think we've got a story about this, right? Women are unemployed at terribly low rates. African-American unemployment is really, really low.
Yeah, if you want to, that was what's quite interesting. The argument always immediately is going to be, well, it's all the white guys working, but that's not true. It's women unemployment is at 3.6%, which is the lowest since 1953. Women in the 1950s.
And lower than the 3.8 average nationally.
Absolutely.
So female unemployment is actually lower. That makes Donald Trump a woke feminist. Keep going.
Okay. Workers who are older than 24 without a high school diploma, that's also at near record lows at 5.4%.
That makes Donald Trump a woke millennial. He's looking after you kids.
And black and Latinos are also, the unemployment rate is at near record lows.
Record lows. That makes Trump the most effective black activist in the country today. Forget Black Lives Matter, which does nothing but protest. Donald Trump has put black people to work. Forget the most woke Latino activist in America today is Donald Trump. Hispanic unemployment is at almost a record low. He cares about Hispanics more than you do, Don Lemon, more than you do, Jesse Jackson, more than you do, Cesar Chavez, God rest your soul. He cares more. He is the most effective advocate for women and minorities in the country we have today. And so you can go ahead and call him bigot all you want. Ignore the real-time progress that Trump has made on these kind of issues and get really angry because of something he tweeted. The more he does that, the more he's living in your head rent-free, which is the way most millennials live in their parents' basement anyway.
Since you mentioned Don Lemonhead, he did come out and he reacted to the record low black unemployment, and he took, of course, a swipe at Trump. It's always Trump's fault. He actually said there's no question, he had to concede this, there's no question today's job report is good news, including the news that we're as close as we've ever been to full employment in the black community. But what's full employment without full respect?
What's full employment without full respect? Somebody gives me $1 million and calls me bald and fat when he does it. I'm taking the $1 million. I'm not the least bit, and maybe that means I should celebrate National Whores Day. Maybe that makes me a hoe, all right? But I'm taking the money. And let me ask you this. Go up to any African American you know, or don't know for that matter. Go up to any Hispanic person, any woman, any minority, and ask them, what do they want? Do they want rhetoric? Do they want politically correct speech? Or do they want opportunities, jobs, money in their pocket, and security? Which do they want? I'll tell you this. Maybe we need to change his name to Don Suck-a-Lemon, because every piece of lemonade that trickles forth from the jug of Donald is turned into pee by Don Lemon, right? You know what I'm saying?
Bring that back.
Give me.
You and your ring.
Trump gives lemonade, and what's Don Lemon doing? He's taking out the sugar, taking out the water, just lemon, 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 lemon.
Speaking of those types of people,
Lemon
Bernie
tree,
Sanders.
very pretty,
All right.
and the lemon flower is sweet. All right, anyway,
okay, moving on.
See a little 60s hippie music for you there.
Hippies,
Kingston
Bernie
Trio,
Sanders, good segue. Bernie Sanders is now attacking Disney because apparently Disney is not woke enough. They're not giving enough money to their workers. So he was at a rally in Anaheim, California, not the state that he's from, and he spent time campaigning out there, and he's demanding a moral defense for Disney and other billion-dollar corporations that pay executives a lot of money but not their workers. He says, I want to hear the moral defense of a company that makes $9 billion in profits, $400 million for their CEOs, and have a 30-year worker going hungry.
Well, I'd like to make that same argument about Bernie. Who else in America gets to spend their entire adult life employed by government with Cadillac health care because, Bernie, you and your congressional and senatorial colleagues voted you didn't have to take Obamacare? Somebody who has the kind of perks and privileges Bernie Sanders has had by never actually having held a job, right? A man who's married to a rich and apparently shady college administrator, right? $1 million house, beach house they just bought. Talk all you want, Bernie. You can lecture Mickey and Minnie and Goofy all you want. But you know what? You are the biggest Disney character out there. You're kind of a combination of Goofy on one hand and Scrooge McDuck on the other, right? And there was this weird combination of here you are with all of your wealth and privilege, lecturing other people, right? Kind of the Scrooge McDuck angle, and Goofy just legitimately stupid. But then again, you're the guy who honeymooned in the Soviet Union in the early 1980s, where there was no Russo Disney. Let's just say that. That's the place you want to move to, right? It's just a shame there are so few genuinely communist states left. You'd like to move there where there is no Russo Disney, right? What would they have? Instead of Pirates of the Caribbean, they'd have Pirates of the Gulag, right? Yeah. Where you have a little tram through Potemkin villages. It'd be wonderful, right? The Chernobyl teacup ride. Bernie, just go. You take de Blasio with you, the two of you. Go back to the former Soviet Union, set yourself up as mid-level kulaks there, right? Apparatchik administrators, and just live your life tormenting poor people, because you don't seem to have any more of an impact here. Disney, really, if you're going to go after Disney, go after Euro Disney, for God's sake. Nobody wants a baguette when they go to Disney World, please.
You know who you forgot?
Who'd I forget?
Pocahontas.
Oh, Pocahontas. Oh, God. Yeah, that's the trio. Take Senator Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and de Blasio, these three, right? The totem pole of Twittery, and send them someplace, anyplace else. And I'm surprised that Hiawatha wasn't in California with Bernie. Nothing that California's bad enough. without importing New Englanders there to actually criticize the one organization in all of California that actually works and employs people.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed a quote that was released from the vice president of Disneyland Resort Communications, who fought back against this because Disney has actually been promoting that they'd be willing to raise the hourly wage to $15 an hour, and that they're going to offer education programs to help their employees. She comes out and says, while Mr. Sanders continues to criticize Disney to keep himself in the headlines, we continue to support our cast members through investments in wages and education. Pow.
Well, I love it when liberals eat their own. I love it. The fact that Bernie Sanders is going after Disney. What's next? Starbucks? I mean, maybe Bernie Sanders is going to have to be taught diversity inclusion by Starbucks. Maybe that's what we need next.
Yeah. Speaking of eating their own, we have a story coming out of Britain about obese people being that they should be allowed to start work later to ease the rush hour anxiety. This is coming out from Professor Stephen Bevan. He's the head of HR research development for the Institute for Employment Studies. That long title means he's government employed. And he's saying that obese people should be allowed to start work later. That would ease the anxiety on them, and that would be a healthier work environment for them and for everyone involved. He said it can be working time, it can be having a bit of understanding that someone might need to turn up at 10 o'clock because they have trouble with transport or anxiety about transport.
Yeah, well, that's great, and that's fine with me. I mean, being bald, short, fat, unattractive, with a whole lot of other demerits at I mean, by that argument, I don't have to go to work at all, right? So if we're going to do it this way, all right, overweight people get to come in an hour or two later. That means skinny people, because they're the skinny privilege, of course, right? They're going to have to go to work 2 hours sooner. Let's make this really fair. I will take I'll come in 2 hours later. You will, well, you're short, you've got that handicap. But you, as a non-heavy person, you'd have to come in 2 hours earlier. See? Okay. And we'll play it out. Everybody gets to work the number of hours in the day dependent upon their handicaps. Somebody like me, you owe me, right? I don't have to go into work at all. You're going to have to work twice as hard. I don't have to go into work at all. But we're going to play this game because it's never ending with the left, right? It's never ending. Everything now has to be who gets to play the victim bandwagon. The single biggest thing that left-wing progressivism has taught us over the last 20 years, and it's a dangerous thing, is that to the victim goes the spoils, not to the victor, not to the successful, not to the motivated, not to the successful dieter, to the victims go the spoils. And that's a bad way to run a country. But then again, you knew that because de Blasio and Bernie Sanders and Lies with Wolves, they all three of them keep supporting the Soviet system that was more or less based on this, right?
All right. We're going to quickly go to campus. We have a bunch of stories that kind of all tie into one thing. So our first story coming out of campus, even though school's out for the summer, we have a professor who is calling for Marxist education in K-12. Wayne Au is a longtime social justice educator who teaches classes in the UW Bothell School of Educational Studies. He's coming out with a book called A Marxist Education, Learning to Change the World. And he actually says in the first chapter of his book that these dire times have sparked an upsurge in activism that is heartening and full of revolutionary potential. And I think a new generation of teachers could build upon this radical momentum by helping their students explore and consider Marxist ideas.
What dire times? I mean, the economy's booming. You've got almost zero unemployment. We've got talks on the table with some of our worst enemies, North Korea. We've got alliances forming against the nuclear ambitions of Iran. What is this horror? The global warming with each year that goes by becomes less and less and less likely to be occurring, right? There's less and less evidence for it. What is this big dire crisis that, other than the presidency of Donald Trump, that requires more socialist teachers?
There it is.
And this goes back to what we said before about de Blasio and Bernie Sanders and the whole lot of them. This is socialism, particularly in the modern world, is an ideology in search of an outrage. In order for anybody to take socialism even remotely serious, there has to be all this ginned up outrage. And where is it? Right? And so now they want, as if it's not happening already, now you've got professors who are arguing that it's really important that our elementary, middle, and high school teachers become primarily teachers of socialist ideology. Understand this, America. Your schools, your government public schools, are now primary about cultural change and social justice. They're not about educating your kids. And I know you have another story that's going to feed into this.
Yeah, we're going from one UW to a different. So University of Washington system to University of Wisconsin system. We have a UW Whitewater professor who also wants K-12 schools to be fighting something, this time toxic masculinity, and start this training in, of course, kindergarten. Kathleen Elliott argues that, quote, finding ways to promote healthy masculinity early and to teach boys and young men to recognize, reject, and challenge simplified toxic masculinity is essential for creating cultural change.
So Professor Elliott actually wants us teaching 4- and 5-year-olds about their own masculine privilege. Little boys who are too young to even understand what the word gender means. Little boys who have no concept of culture or history. Little boys who are utterly innocent of any kind of abuse whatsoever are going to have to be reprogrammed in elementary and preschool to become different kinds of creatures. In other words, what you're going to do, Miss Elliott, and this is a 100% Marxist initiative. It's the same thing. Lenin said it, other Soviet leaders said it, give us the children. Bill Ayers said, give us the elementary schools. The place for communism, Bill Ayers said, is in the elementary school. So that's what you're doing. You're going to break down masculinity, you're going to break down little boys. At age 4 and 5, you're going to start doing this, to brainwash them and to turn them into different kind of creatures. This is not education. This is cultural reprogramming. This is the Great Leap Forward. This is Soviet brainwashing experiments. And now you have so-called academics arguing that this is the way we need to educate your kids. Have you heard enough to get your kids out of these government schools? Probably not.
All right, we had the class story, we have a gender story, and now we have to have a race story. So a Rutgers professor basically went on a Twitter tirade. James Livingston, a history professor at Rutgers, he had this expletive-laced Twitter rant after he visited Harlem Shake, which is a burger restaurant. And basically what set him off was white people. And he's white. He said, okay, officially I now hate white people. I am a white people, for God's sake. But can we keep them, us out of my neighborhood? I just went to Harlem Shake on 124 in Lenox for a classic burger to go. That would be my dinner, and the place is overrun with little Caucasian a-holes who know their parents will approve of anything they do. Little
Caucasian a-holes. Can you imagine saying that as a professor about any other demographic? Little transgender a-holes, little African-American a-holes. Can you, little female a-holes? It's unbelievably staggering what tenure is become, right? And so you've got this highly white dude, at least he admits it, right? A typical cisgendered white dude who goes to a black burger joint in Harlem to get some food to go. That apparently is not a problem, right? That's not a form of cultural appropriation at all. White dude goes to inner city black Harlem hamburger joint to get some food. That's perfectly, see, he's a woke professor with a PhD.
Here's what happens. In this Twitter rant, he goes on to say, I hereby resign my race.
Yeah, he resigned his race. Fact is, Whitey, you can't do it. You're a white man in a black man's restaurant, and you gave your money, you got your hamburger. And what bothered you, and for all your talk about how white people need to diversify, white people need to experience what it's like to be somebody else, white people need to patronize non-white businesses, you got a group of white families who brought their kids, their whole family to this restaurant to sit down and eat. I'll bet you the black owners of that restaurant weren't the least bit bothered by all that white cha-ching that's filling their coffers. Not in the least. You, white boy, you were the one. This is the problem with America. White progressive liberals, what I call it progressive privilege. White progressive liberals are the ones dictating how blacks should feel about white people, how blacks should feel about how other races respond to things. And you can go ahead and resign your whiteness all you want until you resign your professorship of history, because we've got way too many white male historians in this country, by your own language. The minute you resign that, I will take you seriously as a social justice warrior.
Well, he might not need to resign it, because we just have a study that came out saying that in 2016, more than 40% of students who started a 4-year college degree in 2010 had not completed it. So 6 years after starting a 4-year program, 40% of students have not completed it.
Yeah, and this is pretty par for the course. Growing close to half the kids who start their college degrees will never finish them. But that's 1 or 2 or 3 years of student loan debt these kids have rung up. These kids are not able to graduate. They certainly can't do a 4-year degree in 4 years. It's taking them 5 or 6 or 7 years to do it. And what are they learning? What exactly are they getting in these schools? They're getting professors like the one at University of Professor Elliott at Whitewater, who are basically arguing, let's not talk about academic achievement. Let's just bring what? toxic masculinity studies into the kindergarten classroom. You get Professor what's-his-face from Rutgers. What's his name?
Rutgers is Livingston.
Professor Livingston. That's just, could you think of a more white bread name than that? Professor Livingston at Rutgers now arguing basically that little white a-holes should not be allowed to eat in black restaurants, despite the fact that he keeps arguing that whites need to understand black culture better. And finally, you've got this story, right, where you've got all these little kids. Well, not the little kids. You've got the story here about they're kids. They're kids. They're 20 until they're 27. They're kids under Obamacare.
Or
kids
30.
Who are being 30. Yeah, kids are being forced into college now. They're being told that this is the only way. That without a college diploma, they're not going to get ahead. College is doing nothing now but remediating kids, trying to catch kids up to high school level work in college because they never learned that, and then feeding them its own steady diet, glucose drip diet, intravenous diet of left-wing Marxist propaganda in their classrooms. Quite frankly, not finishing these college degrees is probably the smartest thing that most of these kids are ever going to do.
Yeah, and just so people get a perspective, this basically means this equates to 2 million college students starting and then never finishing. And it actually, just one quick more point, they said also that only 26% of students who start a 2-year college program, only 26% who go full-time, it's their first time, will finish in 3 years. So a 2-year program is going to take you 3, and that's only a quarter of the people.
And we are much less intellectually preparing kids for college and forcing them to go and giving them much more ideology to replace real learning.
Yay. All right, well, let's celebrate something. We have a viewer question. So we got a question this week from Cindy in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Hi, Duke and Katie. Thanks for the weekly laughs. I want to get your take on President Trump's announcement canceling the Philadelphia Eagles' trip to the White House. I'm a huge Eagles fan and was so excited when they won their Super Bowl. But some of the political actions of these players drives me nuts.
Yeah, this is one that gets me absolutely crazy. It drives me absolutely crazy. So the Philadelphia Eagles have made it known that many of them weren't going to go there anyway. There was no way they would show up in Washington, D.C. to support this racist president. You've got the team ownership griping about Trump. You've got the mayor of Philadelphia bad-mouthing Donald Trump. And then all of a sudden, Trump says basically, well, screw you then. You're not invited. You're fired from your invite. At which point, you would think they're heartbroken about this. The mayor of Philadelphia is whining about Trump canceling the trip. No one was going to go anyway. This is the privilege of the of the left that we talked about before, the athletic left in this case, that you can have it both ways. You're mad when you're invited, and you want to make a big deal of not going, then he cancels it, Donald Trump, which means you can't not go and make a big deal about it. In other words, he stole your thunder. It's the same thing the NFL just did to you with the protest rules, right? We talked about this a little bit last week. Look, you can protest anything you want. You have more rights to protest in the NFL than in almost any other job you would have. Name another job you can have, lefties, where you can actually do damage to the bottom line of the company by protesting on company time, and nothing happens to you. That's what you have in the NFL. And all the NFL did was they basically said, go ahead and protest. You can stay in the locker room during the opening national anthem if you want. And here's the thing. Let's say half the team, half the Philadelphia Eagles, decide they're going to stay in the locker room rather than come out on the field during the national anthem. They're going to protest. There will be more cameras in the locker room than will be on the field. You'll get your protest just from the locker room. None of the rest of us can spend almost all of our time at work engaging in these kind of protests. You can. Not only that, but the NFL fed millions and millions and millions of dollars into your social justice fund to spend on all sorts of initiatives. So I have no sympathy for you. And good for Donald Trump. I don't care if it is petulant. You don't want to go. You don't like him. Your whole city seems to hate him, right? And so now you're mad at him for telling you to go pound salt? Grow up.
Well, Cindy,
is that more than you wanted to know? Cindy in Pottsville?
Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Cindy, that's a mouthful. I hope that he answered your question. If you have a question for Dr. Duke or the Dr. Duke show in general, which includes me, make sure you send an email to askduke, ASKDUKE, at fpeusa.org. Make sure to give us a like on Facebook, and if you could, give positive affirmations, at least about me, on our SoundCloud and iTunes reviews. Head on over to SoundCloud and iTunes to do that, and then obviously we're on YouTube as well, so check us out there.
And somebody, please send Katie a question specifically for her. I got to hear about it every single week. Maybe it's about Argyle. Maybe it's about being unusually short. Just something she knows about. She needs to feel validated.
A lot of things. You just don't let me answer because you...
And that does it for us this week. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, and we will see you next time.